How's everyone doing this morning? Good. So I wanted to start today with a video that I ran across, and it was posted a couple weeks ago, but truthfully, it really doesn't have anything to do with my presentation today. However, I wanted to play it because I thought it was very appropriate for the Colorado IT Symposium. I didn't realize we would have folks from out of town here, so if anything, this video is really meant to inspire you and to be grateful for the beautiful and wonderful state we live in. It was created by Making Colorado, a branding effort for Colorado. And for those of you who aren't from Colorado, maybe it'll make you jealous enough that you'll want to come and live here. So let's take a look.
Colorado has always rocked. As far back as anyone can remember, it's been a place of indescribable beauty, where people have worked and played against a breathtaking backdrop. A place where residents can't believe they actually get to live, and visitors wish they never had to leave. But lately, something amazing has happened. A place that was already pretty great has undergone a complete transformation. There's been a renaissance in the Rockies. All of a sudden, Colorado is being called more than just beautiful. It's being called the most creative place in the country, the most entrepreneurial, the foodiest, techiest, fittest state in the union. Sure, Coloradans are skiers and cowboys. They always have been. But now they're celebrity chefs, tech startup superstars, organic farmers, craft brewers, venture capitalists, and aerospace engineers. Creative people who make incredible things. So who better to help make the new brand, the new look and feel of the state of Colorado? And to see that look and feel come to life on the things Coloradans see and touch every day. The signs in our public spaces, the snow plows on our highways, the educational system that inspires our children, or maybe even the driver's license right there in our back pocket. Colorado has evolved, and it's time the state's look evolved with it. So we're asking you, the people who've made Colorado so much more, what makes Colorado, Colorado?
Isn't that great? So I want to start today with, I don't know how many people saw this, but this is the cover of the March issue of CIO magazine. And what they say is they proclaim that there's a new chief in town. Can anyone guess who this new chief is? Any guesses? It's the Chief Digital Officer. And according to Gartner, by the year 2015, that 25% of organizations will have hired a chief digital officer. And they estimate that currently 20% of CIOs out there are taking on this role, whether they have the title or not. And this chief digital officer role is something that, what that tells you essentially is that 80% of organizations out there today have a gap in their organization. They're not filling this role. Your chief marketing officers usually come from a very traditional marketing background, and they're really focused on traditional marketing. And then we have our CIOs that, I know this is a generalization, but most of our CIOs are still focused on keeping the lights on and running the business. And so now we have this gap in our organizations. And what my thinking here is that our CIOs are probably the best positioned to stand up and fill this gap in organizations when it comes to the chief digital officer. And in order to do this, we have to evolve. We have to evolve not only our legacy systems, but we have to evolve our legacy thinking. We have to evolve our legacy skills and our legacy best practices. So before we can look forward and understand, well, how do we evolve? I think we need to look back and understand, how is it that we got here, and why is there this gap in our organizations? So let's start with the consumerization of IT. I remember 10 to 15 years ago, if you wanted to do something cool, you had to go into work to do it because you didn't have the tools at home to essentially do those cool projects, so you'd have to come into work. Today, you have to go home to do the cool stuff because your current systems at work, you don't have the tools and the equipment. A perfect example is when I was putting this presentation together, the firewall had blocked me from social media sites. I couldn't put any clips from social media into my presentation, and I didn't have access to Adobe Creative Suite, so I essentially had to build this presentation at home. I love this Dilbert. My only hope for productivity is to smuggle in my home laptop. And I think what this illustrates is that our customers and our team members and our employees, they expect more. They expect more because of the world around us. The world around us is conditioning and training our customers. They're training our team members to expect more with newer technology and more advanced technology. And the truth is that society hasn't just adopted new technology, but they have adopted new behaviors. And the question is we have to understand those behaviors and we have to adapt to those behaviors. The next thing is, how many have read this book, A Whole New Mind by Daniel Pink? So Daniel Pink talks about essentially the migration from the knowledge worker age to the conceptual age. And he says that there's really 3 drivers behind this. And I'm not going to talk about all 3 of them, but he talks about Asia, he talks about automation, and he talks about abundance. And when it comes to abundance, what he says is that there's so many products and services out there today that do the same thing. How are you going to differentiate those products and services? For example, let's start with something pretty rudimentary, toilet bowl cleaners. When you go to Target, how many toilet bowl cleaners are on the shelf? There's probably 10 to 20. 10, 15 years back, there may have been 1 toilet bowl cleaner. So how do you pick which toilet bowl cleaner you're going to buy? It's based on the design of that toilet bowl cleaner. And this is why you see, I was in a department store the other day, and there was a KitchenAid mixer in the department store. And it was black, and it had flames all over it. And it was the coolest mixer I've ever seen. I don't even bake, and I wanted to buy it because it was so interesting and different. And I'm not saying design is all about the aesthetics. It's really more about the function of the product or service. But what you're seeing is you're seeing these collaborations with artists and designers and product people and service people because we have to differentiate. And we're differentiating on user experience and we're differentiating on design. So my theory is that marketing and technology are converging. We're seeing this convergence. In the past, our enterprise systems, our core systems that it took to run our business were back office applications. And now those back office applications are migrating to the front office. They are front and center. Our front office team members, our ops folks are using them, and they're all consumer-facing applications. And so the way that we design those applications, the way that we administer them, it has to be different. It can't be the same way that we've always done our back office applications, the way that we build them and the way that we deploy them. And the intersection of marketing and technology, this is the gap in your organizations, is with the chief digital officers coming in. And the question is who owns customer experience? Who in an organization? I think what we see today in the clients that I work with today, it's all over the board. And what you're seeing is different people own different pieces of customer experience. So you're getting very disparate, not integrated experiences for our customers. We have companies that have 4 or 5 different apps because their departments aren't talking to each other. And so this convergence essentially of technology and marketing is where this chief digital officer role is coming into play. So let's take a look at a couple examples of what I truly believe are great customer experiences. And remember, an experience is defined by the journey as it is perceived by your end user, by your customer. So it's not necessarily a journey that you feel your customer feels, but it's really the way that they perceive your product and your brand and your services. So the first example is the Red Robin customizer. We were charged essentially with, we had to start displaying nutritional information for all our menu items. And what most companies do and what you could see is that you could have the menu item listed with the fat count right next to it. So you could have a 5-alarm burger, 200 grams of fat right next to it, right? But what they did is they built a customizer. And not only does this display nutritional information, but ingredients slide in and slide out based on their differentiator of customization, and allows you to, it essentially drives craveability. And that's their ultimate goal, is driving craveability. So they've created this very interactive application. I think most of you are probably familiar with Epic Mix. because we all live here in Colorado, and I'd venture to say most of us are probably skiers or snowboarders. But I think this is one of the best integrated experiences out there. And to me, it looks like it's executed flawlessly. And remember what I said, experience is all about the perception from the customer. So I'm the customer, and I'm sure there's probably people here from Vail Resorts who think the process of getting this out may not have been flawless, but to me as a customer, it looks and feels flawless. And what Epic Mix does, for those of you that aren't familiar with Epic Mix, is it essentially creates this integrated experience. It takes online and offline and creates essentially what I call one line. And it allows you to check into the resorts, it allows you to share pictures with your Facebook friends, to compete with your friends based on vertical feet and earn badges. Incredibly integrated experience, and I think a lot of people who use it, it drives a lot of meaning and value in their lives. This last example is a department store called Marks & Spencer, and essentially what they do, they also leverage RFID. And as a customer walks into a dressing room, the dressing room knows what they brought into the dressing room. And so it will take the items that you've brought in and it'll suggest ways to style that outfit. And you can actually, you can't see it very well here, but you can thumbs up, you can thumbs down, tell essentially the mirror what you think about that outfit. And you can actually call the dressing room attendant to come into the dressing room and bring items into the dressing room that you like that are displayed on their mirror screens. So what this brings me to is human behavior. And at the end of the day, in order to drive results and drive business outcomes, it's not about the activity of deploying digital solutions or deploying your products and services. What is absolutely necessary is engagement and adoption. You have to have people engaging with your products and with your services and adopting them to really drive the results that you're looking for. So you have two options. Option number one is you can create products and services and expect your customers and your team members and your employees to adapt their behavior to your products and services. Or option number two is you can take time to understand their behavior and adapt your products and your services to their behavior. And option number one, this is where we spend a lot of money and a lot of time, and I would say most organizations probably do this, on change management and training. Because you gotta get people to understand, you know, it's like you're pushing out this product, and I'm more so internally in organizations, and you're telling people, this is gonna add value to your life. Like, you need to do this. We need you to get bought in. We need you to be aware of the change. We need you to get knowledgeable. We need you to get the skill set. So you use change management, you use communication, you use training to drive that change in human behavior. But what if we understood what the unmet needs are, the needs of our end users so well, and we understood their behaviors and attitudes, that we could create products and services that naturally just engage and support and elevate that behavior. It becomes much less of a change management and training issue, and it becomes more about product design and customer experience. So in order to get there, we have to evolve our thinking. We have to evolve our ways in how we implement and deploy and manage our projects in our organizations. And what that really requires is we have to start thinking differently, as the great Steve Jobs says, right? You gotta think differently. So that brings me to designing experiences versus just deploying technology. So many times in organizations, and I ran a PMO, and I know the reality in organizations of you gotta just get this out. Timelines, it's important, you gotta get it out. And a lot of times people feel like success and completion is tied to the deployment of technology. But it's not. It's tied to the results that you're driving, and it's tied to the experiences that you're delivering. So let's take a look. In delivering an experience, you want something that is incredibly engaging and intuitive and simple. So I know this is probably an overused example, but let's take the iPad. I have a 17-month-old daughter, and she can't talk yet, but she knows how to unlock the iPad. She knows which app she likes. She'll go to those apps. She watches Curious George. She watches Mickey Mouse on those apps. And I can guarantee you that my 17-month-old daughter did not sit through a two-day training course on how to use an iPad and didn't read a user manual on how to use an iPad. It's because of the design of the product. It is so intuitive, and what Apple did is they spent a lot of time researching how humans behave, how they interact with each other. I mean, everything is so purposeful on this application, to even the point where you go to unlock that app, there's a slide so it feels like you're unlocking, and then it provides this noise as it's unlocking that tells you you're doing something. And it's that 360 feedback. So every single feature on there is done with intent and purpose. So this brings me to Microsoft Project. Raise your hand if you love Microsoft Project. I see one. I see a lover over there. So Microsoft Project is interesting because people would argue, who's the end user of Microsoft Project? Is it truly the project manager, or is it the people you're trying to communicate with? Is it the people that you're trying to align and provide visibility to and provide comfort to, that we're on track, we're focused, and we're doing the right thing? I know when we would put project plans in front of our business stakeholders, their eyes would just glaze over. They just want you to be simple. They want you to be direct. They want you to tell you what's going on, and they don't want to look at a Gantt chart to understand that. And the other thing that drove me crazy was my project managers were sitting in front of their computers managing these project plans when I wanted them to be out in front of the business. I wanted them working with the business, solving problems, thinking strategically, not updating a project plan that by the time you actually save and print it, if anyone prints anymore, but once you save it and print it, it was already out of date, right? Because things change so quickly. So what we ended up doing is we ended up building, I don't know why this isn't working. Let's see here. Okay. An application based on a social platform. And this is Asana. Some of you may have heard of Asana. It's a project management tool out there that was built by one of the founders of Facebook. And we ended up building a widget that sits on top of it to give us some more rich, dynamic, interactive functionality. But at the end of the day, what we did is we leveraged a social platform. We leveraged a user interface and a platform that our end users were already familiar with. Facebook has already trained them. LinkedIn has already trained them. Twitter has already trained them to tag, to sort, to sync. They understand how to use the application, and it requires very little training on our end to get them to engage. And at the end of the day, our project managers are in the business of the business. Everyone's collaborating real time. They're co-creating. We don't have one person who's the hoarder of information about what's going on in the project. It provides visibility and transparency. And I think this is where everything is going. These are our front office applications. These are our productivity tools. And if we leverage our social and our personal tools that we use in the workplace, it's going to require a lot less training and change management on our part to get the adoption and to get the engagement from our end users. So the infamous to-dos. I'm a to-do. I do tons of to-do lists. And I'll admit, I'm even known to, once I've already done something and if I forgot to put it on my list, I'll put it on my list and cross it off just so I start feeling better about myself. So I went out and researched to-do applications because I needed a to-do application. And do you know how many to-do applications there are in the Apple Store? There's over 1,000 to-do applications. So how do you differentiate your product when all of them do the same thing? There's over 1,000 of them. And I feel like I'm lucky, but I ended up stumbling upon an application that I really think is revolutionary, and I think this is where everything is going. It's based on a gestural interface. So there's no navigation. Everything is done by your hands. The movement of your hands controls the application. And I think what's brilliant about this application, and it's a common guiding principle that I think we should take with us, is they stripped out the functionality. Instead of throwing all the bells and whistles in, they actually stripped out that functionality, and they watched the fundamentals of how you write down to-dos. On a napkin, a Post-it, you write it down, you cross it off. That's as easy and simple as it is to create a to-do list, right? And so what they did is they watched that behavior, they understood it, they took out the sorting, they took out the syncing, they took out all the functionality and bells and whistles and created a very simple interface. Let's take a look. that's an application called Clear. So what we're talking about is the difference between consumption and active engagement. And this is really about push versus pull. So many times we deploy products and we deploy services and we're pushing them on our end users. We're begging them to engage and to adopt and trying to get them to realize that this does add value. I promise, just try it, it does add value. But what we want to evolve to is we want to evolve to, I think our ultimate goal is active engagement. It's that pull of your end user saying, I need this, I have an unmet need, and you've created a product or service or a system for me that helps fill that unmet need for me. And I think that's our ultimate goal, is to be able to move from a push versus pull. There's applications out there today that have wait lists for them. Users are signing up and waiting anxiously to get onto the next release. A good example is there's a new mailbox app, and it's a new revolutionary way of doing email. And again, it's based on understanding human behavior. And it's about 6 to 8 months out before you can actually get the application, and you have to sign up. And the list is so huge for people who are wanting this. Wouldn't it be great? Think about all the systems and projects you have in your organization. If you had people lining up outside of your office waiting for you to deploy them, waiting to actually use them. Well, great. What's your secret? So at Red Robin, there was a sign up in the hall that said, the restaurant business is simple. Simple is hard. And simple is extremely hard to do. I think it's very easy to throw every bell and whistle, to add all the complexity in the world, to appease all of your stakeholders. What's hard is to strip it out and truly understand the needs of those end users and only deliver on those needs. And so like when we talk about vision, creating vision and missions and strategy, why is it that it takes so long to write one sentence that essentially communicates the purpose of why you're here, what your ethos is? You have executives in a room sitting there for days on end trying to come up with that one statement. Shouldn't it be easy just to write a sentence? But it's not, because simple is hard. So this brings me to design thinking. Design thinking is really it's a mindset. It's a problem-solving framework that we can use to help us solve some of our most challenging problems. And what it encourages you to do is it encourages you to be human-centered. It encourages you to have empathy for your end users, and it encourages you to ask why, to understand the deeper meaning behind their needs. So when we look at design thinking, we really look at the triangulation of three things. We look at business, technology, and human. And really what that is desirability, feasibility, and viability. What is desirable for our end user? What do they want? What is feasible? Technically, what is feasible? And operationally, what is feasible? And then what is viable? What is financially viable for your organization? And when you can find the peaceful coexistence of those three things, not only do you deliver an unbelievable experience to your consumer or to your employees, but you can also drive huge profit. In the design thinking framework, we really start with empathy, and I don't think a lot of organizations start here. But empathy is really understanding who are your end users. It's about asking why. It's about digging deeper to understand not just what they're doing and how they're doing it, but why are they doing it? What are their behaviors and their attitudes and their motivations to do what they're doing? Defining is really about taking those findings, capturing them, and synchronizing them and synthesizing them in meaningful ways. It's about categorizing and finding common themes. And essentially, when you come out of this phase of define, it's all about understanding, getting those insights, those ahas into the data that you've captured about your consumer. And then ideate. I think a lot of organizations struggle here because what happens is you have a business problem and a solution is immediately prescribed to that business problem. So you take that solution through the entire life cycle, and to test and see if it's valid or not. And usually you don't even care if it's valid or not because you've invested so much time and so much money into it that you're just going to deploy it anyway, right? Ideate is about going for volume. It's about having a business problem, using those findings, having the empathy for the end user, and going for volume on solutions, and taking a couple solutions through the life cycle to see how they actually, if they're actually relevant and if they're going to provide meaning. So then that gets into prototyping, and I think a lot of us who have come up through software and technology, when we think of prototyping, we think of working software prototypes. But what prototyping allows us to do, and I'll talk a little bit about this a little bit later, but you can do low resolution, low fidelity prototyping, and it essentially allows you to resolve disagreements. It can help inspire, it can help you explore those solutions, and then you will build some of that prototype, and then you can go test it. And I think the key around testing is to iterate. You test and then you iterate. So many times we move a product or a service into the test phase and we don't even allow ourselves time to iterate, right? Because a deployment date is right on the heels of our test. So essentially you're not really even doing a test because you don't have time to iterate on those findings. And this is really somewhat of the life cycle of design thinking, but it's meant to be extremely iterative and moving through this very quickly. So this leads to convert need into demand. And what that means is it's that push versus pull again. How do you get people pulling for your product, wanting your systems, your services to be deployed? And it really starts with human-centered design. Human-centered design is about putting the human being back in the center of the story. It's about understanding who that end user is and designing for that end user. I know we had a customer loyalty program. And in the first phase of that program several years back, what we typically did, and we do this typically on most projects, is you get your cross-functional stakeholder team together, right? And you feel really proud because you're including a lot of different departments and you're getting all this feedback. And you have marketing at the table and they're telling you your requirements and what they need out of this customer loyalty program. And then you have finance at the table and they're telling you everything you can't do, and operations is telling you everything you can't do, and legal is telling you everything you can't do, and IT is telling you everything you can't do. And then you try to come up with a customer loyalty program. So when we went to go deploy that program, what we found is our guests, we weren't seeing the registration, we weren't seeing the conversions, we weren't seeing the results that we had predicted out of this customer loyalty program. Our team members weren't talking about it because it was too complex. We didn't design for our guests and our team member. They were out of the equation in the entire design and development process. And so what I'm saying with human-centered design is, who are your end users, and design from the outside in instead of the inside out, and saying we know what's best for our end users and I have the requirements and I'm going to design them and develop them and push it out. Define the experience, define the end users, and then work inside, from the outside to the inside, and figure out what those processes are that you need to deliver on that experience. So let's take a look at a clip that kind of goes a little deeper on human-centered design.
I love that. When we're trying to talk about user-centered design, I think what we're doing is we are trying to understand what a person's life is like in a rather broad sense.
Because user-centered design helps us identify unvoiced needs. It helps us identify that friction between the user and the world, and the places where the user's way of thinking, their mental model, doesn't match at all with the way the product or the experience or the software, whatever matches, looks like, and help kind of reveal those unmet needs. Well, unmet needs are one component of business. If you can find unmet needs and match them with your services, you can make money.
Now, our goal as designers of this thing should not be to have this object be an end in itself. You know, the happiness isn't going to come from engaging in this new piece of software. You know, if by using this product or by owning this product or coming in contact with this product, you see it as a window through which you engage more meaningfully with life, then I think we've done the right thing. But you notice where that puts the emphasis. The emphasis is not on the product. The product becomes like a hole that you look through, right? It's a kind of very Zen sort of notion, you know, it is in its transparency that it fulfills its function.
So again, this is about shifting to the way people think instead of trying to design the way computers think. Because computers are moving way faster than we are. We're pretty slow. We've evolved over a long period of time some wonderful skills. But if we don't design for those skills, we're lost. We're never going to make it. What do? We're trying to tame complexity. We're trying to help people use the power that complexity brings to see further, to reach further, to differentiate.
And if there's anything you can take out of that video, I think it's the taming complexity. If there's one takeaway when you go back to your office and to your organization is, how can you help tame complexity? So human-centered design starts with observation. And typically when we elicit requirements, we'll sit in a room, a conference room, with these cross-functional stakeholders to elicit what the requirements are. But if you actually take observation and you go to the end user and you watch them in their native environment, not only are you seeing what they're telling you, but you're watching what they're doing. And a lot of times what they're saying and what they're doing is two completely different things. And so there's a lot of power in observation in this tactic for human-centered design. The next piece is, I think we're pretty good at understanding users and their needs, but not necessarily their behaviors and their insights. So we know who our users are, we know what they need, but why do they need those items? And really the question here is, we had a project that was an iPad deployment project. And we had one group that wasn't a control group, and they can have any app they want. And so when we try to lock down the iPad, we asked them, there was a big kind of revolt to locking it down, and they said, we need maps and we need movie times. And instead of saying, okay, well, here's your maps and your movie times, we asked the question, why? Why do you need maps and movie times? And what came out of that question was, we want to be of service to our guests. So now we have this insight. We want to be of service. And the question is maps and movies the right solution to being of service? Or is there a better way for us to connect with our guests and to be of service to our guests? And that's what the importance of asking why is. Empathy. This is walking in the shoes of your end user. As Bill mentioned earlier, I recently started a new job with EffectiveUI. And one of the things I wanted to do is I wanted to have empathy for my team and understand before I made any changes what it is, the struggles that they were going through and what their life looked like at EffectiveUI. So I took on a couple projects and managed them for a couple weeks just to understand what it is they have to do. And it was painful. It was painful going through the tools. There was one Friday afternoon that it took me almost 6 hours to write a status report because of the tools we had. And meanwhile, there's a big happy hour going on around me, and I was writing status reports. And now I have empathy for my team. I understand the struggles that they have with their tools, and now I can help evolve those and understand those unmet needs. This is a customer journey map, and a lot of times I think our de facto is Visio process maps, right? When we talk about process, we use Visio, we use cases. All those tools are extremely system-centric and not human-centric. And so one of the tactics we use is customer journey maps. It's around creating personas and being able to follow the experience of the customer and not just what they're doing, but what are their behaviors, what are their attitudes, what are their feelings and emotions at every single touch point with your brand, whether it's offline or online. This is an example. We were implementing a learning management system. And what we could have done is we could have sat down with learning and development and said, hey, learning and development, what do you guys need out of a learning management system? But what we did is we ran a DACUM, which means developing a curriculum. And we brought in the best of the best. We brought in the best servers. We brought in the best bartenders. And we asked them, what do you need end user, the person who's going to be using the training. On day one, when you start your new job, what do you need to know? What do you need to know on day 3? What do you need to know a month into the job? And we developed and drove from the outside in on that project in order to deploy a learning management system. And this is an example of the DACOM session that we had. Incredibly interactive, dynamic session with our actual end users. So once you get all those findings, it's about synthesizing the information and categorizing it in meaningful ways and trying to drive these insights and understanding of why people are doing what they're doing. And that's really what's important here, is letting those insights drive the experience that you're trying to deliver. So show versus tell. I'm a big proponent of show versus tell, and a lot of times we tell people what we're gonna do, but why not just show them? It takes a lot less time and energy to show them what we're trying to accomplish, and it can happen at a very macro level or even a very micro level. When you're in a meeting and you're talking about what it is you're trying to do, I know many people whiteboard, but the act of whiteboarding and drawing it up, or when you write agendas, instead of writing them in narrative forms, why not draw pictures to show people what it is you're trying to communicate and what you're trying to accomplish? So this next video is an example of a vision demo. And I know Vail Resorts, I heard Robert speak a while back, and I know Vail Resorts did this before they developed a line of code. They created a vision demo for their Epic Mix product and service. And this is a great tactic to essentially get people aligned around vision, what it is you're trying to accomplish, and helps everyone get focused on the actual mission. Let's take a look. Think of all the ways this is essentially a content management system. Think of all the ways that you could describe to someone what a content management system is going to look like. It could be in the form of a 200-page requirements document. It could be in the form of Visio process maps of how information is going to flow. Or it could be in this type of form where it's very visual and it communicates and it helps align and drive decision making because you're very clear in what it is you're trying to deliver. Another tactic we use is space saturation, and this is the concept of war rooms. So war rooms is a place where you can co-create, you can collaborate together, but why not put up visuals about what it is you're trying to accomplish? And I know some projects are sexier than others, so this is a brand transformation project we were doing, and obviously it's a lot more sexy, a lot more visual items that we can put into a war room, but we also had a war room for an ERP implementation, and I would say you can be just as visual with projects that might not be as sexy, but it's important because now people can walk through and they can interact with what it is that you're trying to accomplish. Storytelling is another great exercise that you can do for show versus tell. In describing what you're trying to accomplish, why not create personas? Create a person, tell about their life, show a picture of this person. What kind of family do they have? What are the things they like to do outside of work? And tell a story about that core target demographic of who you're trying to build for. And walk them through the journey in a very visual, low fidelity, low resolution manner. And here's some examples of things that we've done around the to-go process. Be visual. And so when people are reporting issues, why not have them take pictures or screen captures? It helps drive to resolution much quicker. This is an example of a kitchen transformation project we had. And essentially, we had a request that we needed a new refrigeration unit. And instead of, what we could have done is said, okay, your refrigeration unit doesn't work, we'll send you a new one. But we asked them to take a picture of their unit. And what we saw is they had trash cans and other items blocking the cooling of the refrigeration unit. So that's why it was overheating, and that's why they needed a new one. But I think this applies to software too. When your users are reporting issues or challenges that they're having, why not have them take a screen capture or a video of what they're trying to do? It's going to help drive to resolution quicker. Experiential prototypes. This is all about role-playing, and role-playing doesn't cost very much money, doesn't take a huge investment, but what you're trying to do is communicate the experience, the touch points, how your user is going to interact with your product, with the process, the people, and the technology, all wrapped up together. I'm a big proponent of radical collaboration. I think it's really important that people get in a room, that they're collaborating, that they're talking with each other. And there's a lot of ways that we can collaborate radically. And some of these, to me seem like common sense, but I know a lot of organizations are very resistant to doing this. So the first one is invite others to brainstorm, people that are completely outside of your projects, that have no understanding of what you're trying to do, because they might lend perspectives and ideas that you may not have ever received, because the people working on the project are just too close to the project to come up with great revolutionary solutions. So invite people from the outside to come in and brainstorm with you. And I would say find the people in your organization that are innovators, that are creative thinkers, that are open-minded. Even if they work in accounting, even if they work in legal, you will find people and pockets of these types of people in your organization and invite them to brainstorm. We talked about observation. I think it's really important that you observe in pairs. So this is what they're saying and what they're doing. You got one person engaging with that end user in their native environment, in context, and then you have the other person watching what the person is doing. Because a lot of times, the actual end user is doing what we call thoughtless acts, things that they don't even know they're doing, and by observing them, you start picking up these unmet needs. A good example is we were implementing a labor management system. And we sat with our operators in the back office of the restaurant, and we said, okay, show me what you need out of a labor management system. And typically they would say, okay, we need something to forecast. We want it based on historical sales. Then we need to be able to schedule our labor and yada, yada. But when we sat in the back office, what we realized is that, yeah, they need to be able to forecast, and they need to be able to look at historical sales. But what they were also doing, and not telling us that they were doing, is they were checking the weather. They were checking local events. They were doing all these other things to tell them about the activities and the events in the area to help forecast that labor. And they would have never told us that they do that if we asked them explicitly, what do you need out of a labor management system? So that's the power of observation and observing in pairs. Synthesize in teams. It always helps to categorize and think through themes and data and understanding what data is related and correlated to each other when you're working in teams in doing that. Again, cross-functional teams. And then let's not lose sight of testing with our actual end users, not the stakeholders who represent the users, but the actual end users. So this brings me to prototyping. And I think the question here is, how do you know an idea is very innovative? How do you know? I think it scares the hell out of everybody when they hear it. And people just start poo-pooing the idea, right? No, that's impossible. We can't do that. No way. They don't like the idea. And what I would say is dispute the impossible. Take that idea, that crazy idea, and prototype it. And the advantage of prototyping is that you could do it at a very low risk, low cost, low time investment. So part of prototyping in low resolution is taking those crazy ideas and doing them up front in the process and getting the feedback, eliciting the feedback from the end users about what do you think about this? So iteration is very important. These are pictures of some low fidelity wireframes, but they're all sketched out. So as a designer or a BA or anyone who's designing these wireframes or designing the solution, you're not as defensive about your work when you've just invested a couple hours sketching something out. So when you're getting the feedback, you're saying, okay, I can erase this, I can change this. But even as developers, as we start investing our time in solutions, we start getting more and more defensive. And it kind of goes in correlation. The more time, the more defensive we get, right, about the things that we're doing. And so if you can do it in low resolution, it's very easy to iterate on that. I talked about low fidelity prototypes, but even whiteboarding is low fidelity. And I had a PM that was trying to sell an idea to our CEO. And this is an idea that had not really passed, had not been implemented for 5 years, and we've been talking about it for a long time. So he came into my office with a 5x6 whiteboard. And he said, okay, let me walk this strategy by you and get your feedback. So we walked through the strategy, and I thought it was really good. And he said, okay, I'm going to go put this in PowerPoint, and I'm going to meet with him tomorrow. I said, you know what? Don't put it in PowerPoint. Take that 5x6 whiteboard up to the CEO's office tomorrow, erase a couple of these arrows, and hand him a marker, and allow him to co-create with you. And by doing that, I think a lot of times we think with C-level executives, we have to be very buttoned up in the way that we present to them. But I think a lot of times, any person who's a recipient of feedback or when you're presenting something to them, when it's too buttoned up, even in a PowerPoint and it says draft, people start getting threatened. It's not their idea. They don't like it. They feel like you're pushing it on them. So when you enlist the help of low fidelity prototypes, it can help you sell ideas. And sure enough, our CEO bought off on the idea for the first time in 5 years because he felt like he was a part of creating it. He felt like it was his idea, which is fine. And so a lot of times, low fidelity prototypes can help you get pretty far in the things that you're trying to do and can be powerful tools. And then lastly, it's about building an experience culture. This is a cultural change. Human-centered design is a different way of thinking. Design thinking is a problem-solving framework. It's a way of looking at a business problem and solving it. And a lot of organizations are starting to kind of embark on this journey, and I think it can happen from the top down or from the bottom up. I think as an individual contributor, you can go back to your office and start doing some of this. And like I said, it's about showing versus telling. Just do it. Don't start talking about design thinking and all the great things you're going to start doing. Just start doing it. Start prototyping. Start showing versus telling. Start with this radical collaboration. Start with human-centered design. And as people start to notice that you're doing something a little different, they're going to start asking, well, what is that? That feels different. It looks different. And then you can start talking about design thinking. This next video is from Nordstrom Labs, and I don't know if any of you are familiar with Nordstrom Labs, but there's a great case study out there on a sunglass app that they built, and they essentially have a startup within their Fortune 500 company that does this type of iterative design and human-centered design tactics and design thinking. So let's look at an explanation of what it is they do.
I'm JB Brown, the Nordstrom Innovation Lab Manager, and this is the lab. We work on 1-week experiments. Somebody will have an idea and we'll find a way to figure out how to prove if the idea is going to work. The Nordstrom Innovation Lab is a lean startup inside of a Fortune 500 company. A typical day in the Innovation Lab starts at about 9:30 where we'll have our stand-up meeting and figure out what we're going to do for that day and what we're going to try and accomplish. Once we've done that, our work is visible on our Kanban board and people then start pulling work throughout the day to knock off what we're trying to accomplish. And then at the end of our week, we have a retrospective meeting where we talk about not necessarily about the work we accomplished, but how we do as a team. We may create a prototype, a working prototype of software that we write. We may also just create a presentation based on leaner methods. So paper prototype will draw things out and then put them in front of people and say, okay, what would you click on now? And they use a pen to say what they're going to click on and then determine if if it's a good solution, and if it is, then work on a more functioning prototype. The most exciting part about working at this pace is the team that works on it bonds together, and just a community of people that just want to work together and find out the real results. It's really fun, and you don't have to have that red tape getting in the way. As we evolve and have new competitors, we will need to take risks but not lose money while we're taking those risks. So the gains are always a market opportunity. You get more customers or push your brand out to more people. The reason you'd want something like this in your company is because startups out in the industry are going to be doing this anyway, so you might as well take advantage of it and benefit from it instead of having them be competitors and having them come up with the new, fast, cool idea. We should do it ourselves and have it be Nordstrom.
So these guys literally walk in with their Mac computers into the Nordstrom store, and they set up what they called a flash build. It's kind of like a flash mob. They immerse themselves in the native environment of their end users, of their customers, and they will start prototyping. You saw some low fidelity resolution prototypes in there. They're going to start sketching. They're going to ask the actual customer in the store, if you looked at this UI or this screen, what would you naturally push? What do you need? What's going to work? What's not going to work? They start building and developing it in the store. Put it in front of the guests again. Ask them if this makes sense, if there's something else that they would need. Watch how they interact with the application and continue to build. They build this sunglass app in a week in the store, and that's what they do, is these flash builds. And like I said, there's a YouTube video of a case study about the sunglass app that they did that I'd highly recommend. So I think as I leave you guys, the importance here is human-centered design. It's about having empathy for your end user. It's about understanding why. It's about driving the behaviors and attitudes. Fail early and often. We had a chief people officer once that sat us down, and he looked at all of us and he waved his magic wand and he said, failure is not an option. And I'm here to tell you that failure is an option. And I think the key is that you fail early and you fail often. You don't want to fail after you've spent 2 years building something and you've invested $18 million. That's a bad failure. But if you can fail upfront and early and learn from those failings, some of your biggest success is going to come from those early failures. Create small cross-functional teams. And I talked a little bit about desirability, viability, and feasibility. Create teams of 3 or 4 people that essentially represent those 3 functions. Who represents desirability, customer experience, and desire in your organization? Is it your marketing teams? Who represents feasibility, either from a technical perspective or an operational perspective? Have them at the table. And who represents viability from a financial perspective? Is this viable? Who represents that? And have those cross-functional teams working together on solving and iterating through your business problems. Bias towards action. In taking this approach, I know a lot of CEOs get incredibly impatient. They have a business problem and they want it solved now. And that's why there's a focus on timeline and delivering on time. But by taking this action, I think at the end of the day, what CEOs really want is they want to see some kind of progress. A lot of times they proclaim that they have a problem and they want a solution, and then everyone goes into a dark hole and doesn't surface for about 6 months to a year. And then when they finally surface, the CEO feels like, well, there's no progress being made. This approach allows you to have action or have bias towards action, where you're doing things and you're presenting it and you're getting feedback, so it feels and there is progress that is being made towards the solution. Activities versus results. I always talk to my team about this because activity, it does not equate to results. Deploying technology is an activity. It is not a result. And the result is the change in human behavior. It's the engagement and adoption you get that will drive the results that you're looking for. So make sure you stay focused on the results and not so much the activity. And lastly, what I'm going to leave you with is think big, start small, scale fast, and most importantly, drive from experience. So thank you very much.